because these animals aren't just eating grass. And if they are, they're probably not getting the nutrients they need. What they're likely eating is a mixture of grass, forbs, and legumes, and especially those legumes, things like alfalfa and clover.
Welcome to MeatsPad. In collaboration with the American Meat Science Association, it's a platform dedicated to share breakthrough knowledge that is accessible to the global meat industry. On each episode, you'll have the opportunity to listen and learn from meat specialists and professionals about the whole meat industry. This podcast is brought to you by the U.S. Meat Export Federation, Ultrasource, equipment and supplies for the meat and food industry, Viscofan collagen casings, the best alternative to animal gut casings for a better taste and sustainable sausage making.
Hello, me folks. Welcome back to the MeatsPad podcast. Great to be back on this platform. Welcome, Dr. Bass. How are you today?
I'm fantastic. I'm excited to be here as usual. We just got back from a little bit of a workshop. Both Francisco and I, we do these occasionally, and we go out and help educate folks in the meat business as well as producers. And we were just out in the central part of the country doing a workshop for beef producers and breaking down carcasses and talking about meat quality and things like that. So it's been a good trip.
Yeah, it was a full day, and I think it's very interesting to to get all those questions from the listenership, but also getting the opportunity to learn more about what they're doing in the Midwest for beef production.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the questions on quality, some of the questions on marbling, because everyone at the end of the day, they want to enhance their quality to, just improve the eating experience for consumers. So we had a couple of things, and I would like to start off by asking you, you mentioned, and we were visiting about how humans perceive quality grade, and I think it's interesting because some people know about prime, choice, and select at a consumer level, but there's some people that don't, and all they look at is color first and then marbling. So I think we can start from there as see how the current consumer perceive quality and what can be measured and what cannot be measured by the consumer. So.
So just to remind folks out there, there are three main quality grades we talk about, which is select, choice, and prime. And this is in the beef category. There's different quality grades for lamb. Pork has kind of a unique situation out there. In short, beef is overwhelmingly the one that is discussed amongst our red meat species here in the United States. And I would also say the most effective as far as official USDA grades. And so of those three that we regularly mention, there's 8 actually official USDA quality grades. And that could be a good quiz question for those who are out there, maybe in the academic world. What are those 8 official quality grades? But the 3 that we overwhelmingly discuss are select, choice, and prime. And you can think of them as kind of a good, better, best scenario. And in fact, many, many years ago, the select grade indeed was called good. And that had been changed several decades ago into what we now know as select. But select is going to be our lower amounts of marbling. And we talk about marbling regularly on this podcast, but marbling is the little flecks of fat or the little flecks of flavor, as we like to say, in the meat. It is a very effective means of adding quality and palatability to a piece of meat, and this can very easily be transferred into our other red meat species. It's just that we use it primarily as a main source of quality in beef. So there's not a lot of marbling in a select steak. It doesn't mean it can't be good. It's just it's a lower amount of marbling, and marbling brings about flavor, tenderness, and juiciness. Those are our palatability traits. And so the more marbling that we can have in a steak, the higher potential for eating quality and palatability there will be there. I believe it was out of Texas Tech University, Colin Corbin's paper that specifically called out, and I regularly use this in 2015, specifically called out, as marbling increases, so does palatability. And so awesome quote, and I use it regularly. the overwhelming majority of beef out there right now is in the choice grade. So that's the better section. And within the choice grade, we have the upper two tiers choice categories where we can add a little bit more value to those carcasses. This is where brands like the Certified Angus Beef brand, Sterling Silver, Chairman's Reserve, Swift 1855, etc., have really capitalized on that difference that occurs halfway through the marbling standards within the choice grade itself. And so we're reaching a level of palatability that is noticeable by those who are eating the meat, and so we can add a little bit more value to the carcass. And usually, if the packer has it set up, usually that pays more to the producer, to the farmer, the rancher, the feeder. And then we get into the prime category, and prime is the best level of marbling that we can achieve in the United States right now. It's definitely not the minimum amount of the most amount of marbling that can be achieved out there. You know, we have the Wagyu type cattle that can really reach extremely high levels of marbling, and we end up getting more into the Japanese grading system to partition those different levels of marbling. But the reality is that U.S. beef at a prime level really satisfies. It's somewhere in the 10 to 12% of the mix right now that we're producing prime beef, which is pretty darn cool. That we haven't seen numbers like that, as far as I can tell, ever in the history of the United States. So it's really neat to see those levels of marbling that we're achieving right now, and the way that happens really is twofold. Better management, good feeding practices, good handling practices, but then the animal has to be predisposed to achieving those levels of higher marbling. So that's a genetic potential, and I really applaud our farmers and ranchers for focusing on that, because it's good for them and it's good for the consumer.
And you mentioned history, and I think it's awesome that we're talking about this, because that component in my mind is also very important in this equation. And if we don't have that, we cannot ask that producer to get better quality. Is the consumer and the education at the consumer level, so they can understand and sense and eat and feel what is like a better quality. And I remember, like, we were discussing a very good slide that you had on the select proportion that has been decreasing over time. That's my mind. That's also due to the consumer demanding more high quality products.
It absolutely has to do with that. Farmers and ranchers aren't going to spend more on feed management and genetics unless there's a return on that investment. And there is a return on that investment now. And in fact, I'm gonna look into my foggy crystal ball and see just how good of a predictor it is. But I'm gonna say the next several years, those who are achieving those higher levels of marbling are going to really benefit from a producer standpoint. Yeah, I mean, we're looking at somewhere, close to like maybe 15% of the fed cattle grade is select. In 1995, it was almost 50% of the fed cattle grade out, and that was higher numbers of cattle too. And so we have really changed the dynamics of marbling, that the spectrum of marbling that we're seeing out there has really started to focus a lot more on the higher quality grades, for sure. And I mean, you think about this, Ford, Chevy, Chrysler, they're not going to build a fancier car unless somebody's there to buy it. They're not going to put all the extra features on there unless somebody is willing to pay for it. Yet there's no such thing hardly at all as buying a car that doesn't have air conditioning anymore, and that doesn't have electric windows and things like that.
It's a commodity.
We're just starting to reach a level of expectation by the consumer, but they're willing to pay for it too. And so that's pretty cool with beef.
Since 1883, Ultrasource has been a trusted supplier to the food industry. Ultrasource provides superior kill floor, processing, packaging, and labeling equipment and operational supplies.
Yeah, and we had a translated version for a very interesting podcast with Dr. Maria de la Salud, and she talked about cultivated meat and the future cultivated meat that will happen in 5-10 years, and I think it's good to understand because from now in 10 years they might be that not I'm not going to say competing, but there will be other products on the market that
Mhm.
will be
Options.
there for available for the consumers.
Mhm. Yep. Additional options. Sure.
Other question that we had, and I think we have not discussed much about feed and grassland and grass fed. They were mentioning about Jersey steers and how can they perform on grassland.
Mhm.
And I know we can dedicate this half of the episode on feed and some of what is available here in the Midwest. Some that can be found here in those, I guess, misconceptions about extensive versus intensive. So
Yeah. So the way to achieve marbling and palatability is, of course, the genetic component, but you're mentioning now more on the management side and what it takes from the feeding standpoint. And overwhelmingly, we will provide a concentrate ration to cattle to finish them on a commercial basis here in the United States, and it works very well. It's very efficient. I will very much argue that it is a sustainable, environmentally friendly manner of producing beef. However, there are those customers out there that would prefer an animal that is raised on pasture completely, or forage, and so we often will use the terms grain finished, grass finished, and or grain fed, grass fed, and those are they're not really precise terms. What we need to be saying is more concentrate finished or forage finished. And so the concentrate finished animals definitely would encompass the grains, the corn. Here in the Pacific Northwest, where I reside, we do feed a lot of potato byproducts. Either way, we're looking for the starch content that's going to be in the plant material that we're feeding to that animal, and that's very nutrient dense, a calorie dense, energy dense feed that those animals can convert into fat very efficiently. And so the fat, of course, is what we're trying to target in the animals that have the potential for marbling. And so as the story, spools out, we end up with high marbled, high quality beef. Okay. Then there's the forage finished option, and way too often it's called grass fed. Well, guys, there's very few cattle in the country that aren't grass fed. Overwhelmingly, the cattle in this amazing country in North America and in the world are out on grass at some point in their life and grazing, and that's doing what they do and doing it well. They're an amazing, miraculous creature that can convert grass into meat and milk and fiber in the form of leather and things like that. It comes down to, what is that animal eating right before it goes to market, right before we slaughter it, and that's the finishing phase, the fattening or the finishing portion of that animal, and that's where we're looking and seeing, are they being allowed only forage? And I don't like the term grass, because it's painting in broad brushstrokes, because these animals aren't just eating grass, and if they are, they're probably not getting the nutrients they need. What they're likely eating is a mixture of grass, forbs, and legumes, and especially those legumes, things like alfalfa and clover, are going to have the protein content and these animals need to truly thrive. And alfalfa is not a grass; it's a legume, and that's a very different type of forage. So either way, we're finishing these animals on a forage-based ration. Historically, and still to today, a lot of those animals that are finished on a forage-based ration take longer to finish because it's not as nutrient dense as our higher energy concentrates. And so the animal's likely going to be a little bit older. It's going to take longer to do. It's less efficient, um, and uh, and it's harder to predict the end quality on those animals. With the concentrate ration, we have a pretty good idea as to how that animal is going to perform in carcass form. Whereas the forage, it's very dependent on the time of year, the quality of the forage, the quality of the feed that they're out there on. And the types and everything. And so there's just less prediction. Can you get highly marbled, tasty beef off of forage finishing? Yes, absolutely. I've seen it my whole life, in fact. And you mentioned Jersey steers. I grew up on the very north coast of California. The weather's like Ireland out there, and green pastures nearly year round. Clover and rye was the native forage that the animals would be out there grazing on, and we could get marbling. We could get it pretty well. The other thing, though, too, is that we had Jersey steers that we were feeding. We were that we were raising. We were in dairy country in that area, and so the Jersey bulls were plentiful. We turned them into steers. We put them out on pasture. They grow, and the rest is history. Other than they're very small animals, and that will lead to marbling potential as well. If it's a smaller animal, the concentration of the fat will be greater, because you're not going to dilute the fat necessarily with muscling. But the other thing about the fact that they were Jerseys, and this would apply very well to Holsteins and any other dairy breed, is that dairy type animals do marble well. And so if we can get them on a higher energy ration, or even on that higher energy forages, they can marble well also. And so that was just, I'm throwing a lot of ideas out there. This is a discussion that's much greater than what we can do in a 20 minutes that we have, 20, 30 minutes that we have. But, just giving some ideas and getting folks to think that there's not just one way of producing beef. There's definitely a number of them out there. If you have a customer base that's choosing to purchase more of the forage finishing, just be aware that it's going to probably take more overall management to take care of those animals to get to a level of quality that your customers are going to be happy with. We don't want to just do one thing but not fulfill the full objective, which is getting somebody to a point where they're content with the food that they're buying, the value that they're paying for it, and that they want to come back to it. That's very, very important. Just because you're grain finishing, forage finishing, what have you, it still has to be good so that the customer comes back to it. And that was the big the big point that we were trying to make during our discussions.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's important to point out that we're not saying one is better than the other one. It's just given or due to the conditions you're given, the condition the place you're at, and it can be in the U.S., it can be in other places in the world. Use what you have, right?
Yeah.
And there's some places that there's a lot of opportunity for grazing, and other places that are more convenient for feedlot management. So it is good to understand some of the advantages and disadvantages of each one. And I think there's also the component that, you mentioned genetics, but we can talk briefly about EPDs, and then we can just finish off this episode. It's awesome. And I will encourage people listening that want to learn more about this, because I guess we haven't discussed thoroughly about feed and how that impact quality, and we can for sure discuss more in depth with other guests, and in the specific points that you mentioned. So
I love the nutrition world, both human and animal nutrition. I think it's fascinating, but I'm a meathead. I'm not an expert in either animal or human nutrition. I just like to pretend that I am sometimes. So I think it'd be really cool to get an animal nutritionist on here to kind of talk about how those animals can convert feed and turn it into the high quality food that we produce. But back to your question, and the point that you're making is the EPDs. So EPDs, for those who are less familiar with the cattle production world, is what's called expected progeny differences, and EPD is the term that we use. It's a genetic management tool, and we again, we need to probably have a geneticist on here. I'm far from being a geneticist. I'm on the other end of the cattle life cycle, of course. So, but understand just a little bit. Anyway, EBDs can be used. They're big mathematical equations that most breed associations will produce and provide. But it takes information, it takes data to go into those big equations. And so the results are only as good as the data you put into it, just like many other things. But what they can do is help producers who are making genetic decisions. So they could be the seed stock folks that are working with purebred animals. They could be the commercial cow-calf operators that are buying, say, purebred animals, but using the genetics, semens, embryos, etc., bulls, cows, using those for making the next generation of steers and heifers for the food supply. And what they can use within those EPDs is a variety of different traits, but some of the big ones that we really focus on are birth weight, weaning weight, ribeye area, and milking or mothering of maternal abilities. And then marbling is often one of those EPDs too, that we can work with as well. And so, marbling is highly heritable, as our geneticists would say. Our folks that work with helping farmers and ranchers manage their producing females and bulls. And if we can focus on marbling, we can get a higher quality animal. But nature doesn't like what's called single trait selection, and nature likes variability, diversity in genetics. And so it's interesting to see, there are farmers out there that focus entirely on marbling, like almost 100%. Usually it comes with good maternal traits, but it starts to make that beef animal look closer and closer to a dairy type animal, interestingly enough, and just kind of makes them more narrow, streamlined, and not as much muscling. I'm not saying it can't be done. I'm not saying you can't get a bigger, heavier animal with more marbling. We're absolutely doing that every single day. But those are the guys that are looking at the balance of genetics and just trying to continually improve their herd. And that's how we're going to continue to make beef and meat, for that matter, in this country. Is we need to continue to look at the genetic potential of the reproductive animals within our herds, our flocks, or what have you, and look at the ones that are efficient, effective, and making some of the best of the product that we want out there.
It's amazing how everything is connected.
Yeah.
Because you end up at the consumer level, but you ended up in the beginning about genetics. So it's all a cycle, and it's amazing.
Hakuna Matata.
Yeah. Yeah. And we encourage like the people and the pig producers that are listening. If you want to know more about these specific topics, certainly we focus more on what happens after harvest. But we can certainly, give 1 or 2 or maybe 3 dedicated podcasts and interviews about this, because it's a topic that really has an effect on the eating experience.
Well,
all,
Francisco, that's why I love being a meathead, a meat scientist, because everything that happens to that animal prior to it going into carcass form affects that carcass. And so, we as meatheads definitely need to be a little bit of a jack of all trades. We're not experts necessarily always in every aspect on the live animal side, but we have to understand it for sure. And because it's all affecting that final product eventually. And then of course we need to know what to do with that final product. And that's where our expertise comes in. So, yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Bass. I think this is a good interaction. Again, a lot of ideas, as you mentioned, but it's that discussion that we had a couple of weeks ago. We're just going back and forth about those misconceptions and those questions from big producers, and I'm sure there will be more, and I'm sure we'll as MeatsPad will do more to help address those questions. Thank you again for your time, and hope to see you soon.
Yes, absolutely.